Now, one of the interesting things for me when we're preparing this conference is that you get sent all sorts of biographical information about people, and it's always interesting to read it. My happy task this morning is to introduce the chair of this plenary session, Professor Mark Considine, and I have to say that rarely have I read an official bio that fails to do justice to the person it's describing. So with your permission, Mark, I'm going to take liberties with your bio and say a little bit about why we've asked you to chair this plenary session and why, for us in the School of Government, you embody what it is that the School of Government is trying to do. So the formal bit, Mark Considine is Dean of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Melbourne. His research interests are varied, including governance studies, comparative social policy, employment services, public sector reform, local development, and organisational sociology. He's a Fellow of the Institute of Public Administration Australia and a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Social Sciences. Mark has consulted nationally and internationally, has very strong connections through his research and teaching to organisations such as the OECD. He's worked with the Victorian Public Service as an advisor and has also worked with prime ministers as well as key agencies such as the Job Network and the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence. But as I say, that kind of information, along with the award-winning research and all of the other things that you might know about him, really fails to capture what it is about Mark that makes him such an important emblem of the School of Government. Mark's work crosses consistently the boundaries between academic scholarship and policy. He doesn't sacrifice academic rigour for practice, but instead ensures that that academic rigour is translated into good practice, and indeed good practice then comes back and informs research. He's also, as somebody who works in his faculty, a remarkable dean. One of the things that happened to me when I came to the University of Melbourne a couple of years ago was, of course, you ask people what's the dean like to work with. And people use a number of words to describe Mark, but the one they use most often is busy. Mark is a very busy dean, and that translates into him travelling all over the world, but indeed all over this region to connect our faculty and the university to a wide range of other institutions, many of which are relevant for our conversation today. But he's also busy in developing new initiatives, and as the custodial dean of the School of Government has played an absolutely vital role in establishing the school and seeing it through its first year of life. So I won't say any more at the risk of embarrassing him, but there is much more that could be said. But I'm going to now hand over to Mark to chair the session.
Thank you, Helen. I thought I had specialised in sending off the minimum length bios whenever I'm asked to do things, because you really want to hear the speakers, not the bio of the person who's chairing. But that was very nice of you to embellish what was just a few lines in the official version. We have a tremendous opportunity in this first panel to set the scene not only for the conference, but I think to open the question more generally about what a School of Government should work on. And I guess, you know, following Glyn's opening comment, for me one of the many exciting things about being here today is not just that we're going to debate this topic and look carefully at its implications, but those of us working on the School of Government, I guess, are going to be looking for opportunities through this dialogue to set an agenda of work, and hopefully from the various discussions that occur, weave together research, teaching, engagement activities. So we have two eminent speakers to get the process started. I thought I would just say a word or two about each of them, and then I'm going to ask Shamsul to begin. Professor Shamsul Haq is known to all of the academics in the audience, but possibly not to some of the local public servants and NGO leaders. He is Chair of Public Administration at the National University of Singapore. He specialises in not only public administration but broader issues of governance, and his research interests cover comparative studies of governance reform, development theory. He's one of the people who's pioneered the link between development theory and questions of governance, Public service ethics and accountability play a big part in the work he's done, and also I know in his outreach work. He's been responsible for an enormous canon of work in this field, including key roles in editing and nurturing the journals that carry this work into the field. So he's uniquely placed to get things started with us this morning. He also, in 2013, received the Fred Riggs Award for Lifetime Scholarly Achievement. Those of us who work in this field remember Fred Higgs as a pioneer of this kind of work, and to receive an award in his name, I'm sure, is a high point in any career. Robert Hill, on the other hand, comes to us from the commercial side. Is head of Super Regional Business Development with the ANZ Bank. I was mentioning to him over coffee that I don't know a lot about banking policy, but I do know that everywhere I go in Southeast Asia there's an ANZ Bank ATM, for which I'm heartily grateful, and no doubt this is a rather simplistic sign, but an important one of the bank's deep engagement and interest not only in the commercial side of the region, but no doubt its wider development. He's had key roles in Australia, Japan, Fiji and the wider Pacific, and before taking on his current role, Robert was Chief Executive Officer of ANZ Japan. He joined ANZ in 2000, and he's also had senior roles both in Australia and Asia Pacific, including being CEO of the Central Pacific region, CEO of ANZ's Fijian operations. So I'm going to ask Shamsul to begin. He's going to speak to us on the topic Rethinking Public Governance in the Asian Century, Grand Discourse versus Actual Reality. And you can do it from here or up there, whichever you prefer, Shamsul.
I think I can do.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Thanks for your kind words about me. And I have already heard the name of the title of my presentation is about Rethinking Public Governance in Asian Century, Grand Discourse versus Actual Reality. Now, I'm very grateful to be here, and when I got this invitation from Helen, I was very excited about this theme. At the same time, I thought that how much do I know exactly about this particular issue? At the same time, I must say that this is something like discussing about globalization, about end of history, clash of civilization, things like that. It's that kind of theme, which can be something like an elephant blind man tries to define. Exactly, cannot see the whole elephant, exactly, difficult to catch. So because of that, it's challenging, at the same time, it's interesting. So anyway, so I think that I will begin by saying that Asian Century as a theme is quite new, and it's increasingly getting attention from policymakers, from academics, and research being conducted on this topic. And basically, this theme came, on the one hand, we have this rising re-emergence of Asia as economic powerhouse in terms of production, distribution, and huge consumption market. And everybody wants to go to Asia because of that. On the other hand, we have a kind of discourse and debate about declining the Western world. So in this current world order, the need for some kind of replacement. So the Sumer, who is actually working on this particular Asian Century debate, and he mentioned that there was for 500 years, Western Europe and North America was the main actor in this world order. Then it's now perhaps time for another agent, another actor to take over that position. And this also has been reinforced further by recent report published by this Australian government white paper on the Australia in Asian Century. Then there was another report by Asia Link Commission at this university here. It's a similar kind of report. Then DBS Bank in Singapore published another report. Then Asian Development Bank published last year, 2011, exactly on Asian Century. So all these reports and documentation and kind of advocacy to a certain degree made this theme is quite popular, and people want to talk about this thing. At the same time, there's some academic research on this issue, really genuine, comprehensive academic research. They are talking about if there is such a thing called Asian century, then how does it affect development studies? How does it affect international order? How does it affect world politics? If there is such a thing, they're not sure. And some are very doubtful about, is there an Asian century exactly? So there's a kind of controversy about this particular issue. Now, definitely there's a kind of rhetoric or reality about this declining Western power, economic power or political, ideological power. And that is another emptiness, there's a vacuum there, and that also legitimizes very well about the new role to be played by Asia. Africa not possible, Latin America perhaps is not possible. So Asia is the rising, and if Europe is still strong, North America is still dominant power, not declining power, perhaps this question might not arise that much. But there's an opportune context for this theme to discuss. Now, the problem with this kind of grand debate is that it's very speculative, it is very abstract, difficult to exactly show evidence about this. Not that it's quite overgeneralized, oversimplified often. So that's why it creates some kind of obligation, policy obligation, intellectual obligation. The rhetoric is there, re-fight into something big. So we have to come in and we have to discuss and we have to find operationalization, the policy formulation to achieve that particular re-fight goal, whether Asian century or Western century or whatever it is. So there's a kind of urge to deal with this thing. Now, because of that, Asian miracle debate, Asian value debate came earlier than this Asian century debate. And there was speculation about who is the main actor behind this Asian miracle. Is it the state or the market? There's big debate on this issue for the last 10, 15 years. And some minor figures like Asian Development Bank or World Bank may say market is the main force. But on the other hand, most people, intellectuals, will say no, it is the government, this developmental state, the patrimonial state in Asia that has been very effective to create this kind of Asian miracle and which now is turned into Asian century. So this is the state, there's lots of controversy about this, the main actor behind this debate. Now, what has happened in the meantime is very interesting. That in the meantime, because of this Asian miracle, Asian century, Asian positive image, Asian dynamism, is tremendous amount of kind of appeal, the positive image of Asia, and because of that, governing institution got extra credit, extra legitimation. Because Asia is doing so well and we're behind it. So because of that, whatever mode of governance they have, state-centric, control, patrimonial, authoritarian, semi-authoritarian, whatever it is, they're very, very proud that we have done it and our role, our model should not be questioned. Previously, lots of scholars in Western Europe or all of us try to look at the critical, the negative side of this governing institution. But now it is becoming less so because Asia is doing so well. How can you question? So it's a kind of different kind of discourse and debate is coming up because of that. Actually, I was reading something interesting about recently, China has become a model for many developing countries. They're sending 15,000 civil servants to China to learn about Chinese model of governing an institution that is a role model to follow. China is very successful. It's a kind of creates some kind of appeal to the global appeal to follow. So it's a kind of model, and they are much more proud, much more confident about their mode of governing, mode of public policy, because its image is so positive, it's so appealing globally. Now, to have this image and this construct about Asian century, it's so positive and so good, so appealing. And that justifies, that rationalizes the institution behind acting on this particular model. Now, and because of that, I think the model itself has to be re-examined. The model itself has to be question and explore critically to see exactly what is Asian century and what is Asian miracle. First of all, one of the things I can discuss is about the different dimensions of this miracle, of this Asian century. One dimension is the reenactment or revival of this old Asian pride, the glory, the civilization, Persian, Indian, Chinese civilization. And also, this is the region, the great religion evolved. All religion actually came from Asia, all great religion. Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, all come from Asia. And there are, of course, other things like, in terms of scientific discovery, in terms of number, many things they had. So because of that old pride, it's very nice feeling, it's tempting to have that kind of, again, the revival. So Asian policymakers, Asian political leaders, maybe, and they're liking, they may like it a lot. So it's in their own interest, they may favor this particular model or particular discourse. This is this Asian century. Second thing is, this is real economic performance, which we cannot exactly deny. The real performance economically in terms of growth rate, for 30 years, whole Asia average growth rate about 7 to 9%. And China, 9%, sometimes double digit. It's unprecedented in history. It's really tremendous and rapid progress they made. Then, in terms of the market, I was looking at some of the statistical figure I have here. It's immense. It's really, it's colossal, huge in terms of the amount of things they consume. Like China, for example, the food industry alone has 1.48 trillion, and they're going to be 3 trillion by 2020. And then they are going to surpass America in terms of, they already surpassed in terms of car consumption. China alone is 18 million car automobile, and they're going to have 30 million by 2020. Huge market. So everybody tempted to go there. This kind of functional need and this kind of need for investor to go there. Then they are going to have, by 2016, China will be at par with almost US in terms of total GDP, which is about 48 trillion, according to them. And it could be, whole Asia may become about $174 trillion by 2050. Is it amount of, is the number, I just looking at these numbers from a very good source. And this is an amazing kind of achievement. So this is definitely give them this kind of legitimacy and foundation to claim this particular kind of template that is Asian century. Now, with regard to other issues, for example, as I said, declining Western power, what they do, they juxtapose, they side by side present Asia doing well, Europe is not doing well. So by doing this also, declining Asia, rising Asia, declining Western Europe and North America. So that also gives some. Now, so which is quite, these are some legitimation, empirical foundation to claim this particular framework, particular perspective about Asian century. But if I could be skeptical about this thing, about Asian century, I want to make some few points here. First of all, if you look at the aggregate figure, they look tremendously good. China, India alone, the population. But if you look at total population, total income divided by the population, it's still very, very, it's not that impressive. And there's some figure like Japan, Europe, and America has about altogether 14% of the world population, but they account for 57% of global GDP. It's still very powerful. So the figure also can be presented different way, then you can disaggregate, then you see a different kind of scenario. The second consideration is that the diversity within Asia. This Asian identity itself, Asian century requires there's some compatibility, some homogeneity among Asian countries. But if you look at very poor countries like Nepal, and we have Singapore, one of the highest per capita income. You have huge countries like China, then we have Brunei, 250,000 people only. So in terms of religion, ethnicity, income level, development level, so altogether, it's a tremendous amount of diversity, and of course there's lots of conflict within Asia. North Korea, South Korea, for example, Pakistan, India. the tremendous amount of the whole Middle East, for example. So as a result, when we claim that this is such a called civilizational artifact like Asian century, there should be some kind of common identity, the common ground, which is difficult to find in Asia. There are lots of conflict, lots of contradiction that is difficult to reconcile. Then, third thing is, still this development in Asia is highly dependent development. The technology, the language, the internet, all are not definitely Asian. Plus, out of 500, the best transnational corporations mostly belong to Europe, America, and Japan. So they are the main kind of initiator, and they're the main people investing in Asia heavily, and development, behind this Asian development, a tremendous amount of outside external dependency. Now, and final thing is there are lots of discussion about de-Asianization. Asia itself is de-Asianized. First of all, Asian state itself is not Asian anymore. Asian state, according to William Robinson, he's a political economist, he said, after neoliberal ideological, perspective that is spread globally, most of the countries' state, including American state, all states in formation, has become transnational. State is no more national. The government itself often has to serve foreign investors' interests more than their own citizens. So state itself has been de-Asianized. How much Asian is the Asian state? One question. Culture de-Asianized. Language is becoming like English medium, for example. So as a result, lots of Asian itself is no more Asian. It's become transnational. Difficult to really, in a globalized world, interdependent world, it's very difficult to really disentangle and say this is Asian, this is European. Lots of production itself has become very complicated. The whole aggregation we have to look at as a whole. And then even I was reading an article about this westernization of Asian diet, the Chinese food, and I was looking at the figure of McDonald's outlet spread. It's amazing. So if you look at this figure here, I have some of this figure here, whole Asia Pacific from 1987, 951 only, and today 7,000 to 8,000 outlets. So it's a very, very, in China, India, everywhere. So as a result, if you look at even diet itself, culture itself, even Japanese people wearing suit. So as it is very difficult to really pinpoint and kind of specify exactly what is Asian and what is not Asian in the whole debate. And final thing is Asian century desirable? First we said it's possible. Is it desirable? If it is possible, is it desirable or not? My take on this is that, first of all, yes, Asia did very well in terms of reducing level of poverty tremendously. In most of the countries, poverty level is low. At the same time, in terms of this urbanization and the creation of slums, out of whole world, about 60% slums are in Asia. According to this report, about 500 million people almost in urban area in whole Asia live in slums to very poor condition. Second adverse outcome of this Asian miracle is this inequality. I look at the Gini coefficient in every country in Asia. Overall, whole Asia, it has increased from 39 to 46. I was talking to, discussing about this thing, about this whole inequality question. Tremendous inequality, it has become worse than before, much worse than before. It's another cost. Then, and most important cost, of course, is ecological, environmental cost. In terms of the worldwide, Nature Foundation and all this report from UNDP report, I was looking at this, all the reports that show that tremendous amount of pressure on ecology and the environment because of this production, rapid industrialization, urbanization in Asia. Tremendous pressure. And I can see carbon emission, for example, multiplied many times. But China is growing tremendously. Think about every Chinese citizen has a car. It's already a tremendous amount of pressure, ecological pressure. And this cost is really tremendous cost in terms of this Asian miracle. Its environmental, ecological cost is tremendously huge. And finally, still, and many regimes in Asia has very repressive, tremendous amount of political control, they're not democratic. So this leads to one final question. that why people are attracted to Asian miracle, Asian century. Why? I would say it seems to me it's more utilitarian, functional need that go there to make money. It's a consumption market is huge. Anybody go there, invest money, tremendous amount of potential, which is good. They gain, we gain, this is very, very fantastic. But at the same time, is there an inherent, intrinsic strength, goodness, virtue that we look for in Asia, except money? So this whole discourse has been economistic, utilitarian, materialistic. There is no, like people fight for democracy or human rights or liberty or whatever, but it's basically the economic, functional, utilitarian need of investors or corporation, for example. But if we think about looking for something, I want to live in China, not in Australia. I want to stay in Indonesia or Philippines. So what are so positive there that I will look for, that I admire as a role model, as a reference point? But I didn't really, difficult to really find something extra economic that we can really look for. If we exclude economic dimension, then what is there that we have to look at? It's a very, very important thing too. So I would say that finally that Asia definitely has done tremendously well in terms of eradicating poverty, creating wealth, many people, better health, better water supply, sanitation and everything. No doubt about that. At the same time, this should be looked at more objectively, rationally. It shouldn't be reified into something supranational, and that looks like kind of something to look for. We have to be, Asia is doing well, it's a model to follow, perhaps there are lots of good things in it. At the same time, we have to be a little bit cautious and critical about its whole modern perspective. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Shamsul. I think you've opened all of those issues beautifully, and we'll come back to those. So if you've got thoughts and comments, we'll have time in the discussion later. Meanwhile, let's move to Robert, who is going to talk on the need to build Asia capability across the workforce.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that great opening, Professor. I think I've actually visited 7,856 of those donut outlets. Not because I like donuts, but I'm fascinated by the range that's available if anyone's been to donut shops outside of the main European cities. Things like green tea icing, white porridge filling, tofu paste donuts. So we think that we've taken these great concepts, Western concepts, to Asia, but it's them who've truly made them unique. Look, today I want to just go through some of the practical things that ANZ has done to connect our workforce and our customers with Asia. And I've got 5 examples to share with you. I thought to start with, though, it was interesting that we picked this hotel for this conference. I looked into the history. I did this for 2 reasons. One is I was a little bit intimidated by the amount of research in this room and the people who've done. And I thought I should at least do a little bit. The Langham first opened in 1865 in London and was heralded as Europe's first grand hotel. What is the requirements for a grand hotel back then? Apparently, its big selling point was it had both hot and cold water in each room. Why do I mention this? Well, Langham Hotels is now an international group across 4 continents. And if you look into the ownership of Langham Hotels, it's owned by the Great Eagle Group, which is a Hong Kong-listed property group, one of the largest property-listed groups in Hong Kong. And I think it's a great example of how relevant the Asia Century has become to even places like Melbourne, where a landmark hotel is owned and run by a large listed Hong Kong property group. So a little bit of ANZ first of all. If I go back 5 years ago, we had about 5 million customers. We were in 29 markets, market cap of 55 billion, and 37,000 staff globally. If I zoom forward to 2003, we've got 8 million customers. We're now in 33 markets, 85 billion market capitalisation, and now 47,000 staff globally. And most of those new staff have come in the Asia region in the last 5 years. Now, I just want to do a little exercise. I want everyone just to stand up for me, if you could, please. So I'm just going to read out a list of countries, and I just want you to make a mental note in your head and just count how many countries you've visited. This looks like a very international group, so I think we're going to go pretty well here. PNG, Solomon Islands, Kiribati, Timor-Leste, Guam, Indonesia, Singapore. You counting? Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, South Korea, Myanmar, Laos, Samoa, American Samoa, Vanuatu, Fiji, New Caledonia, Cook Islands, Tonga, Vietnam, Cambodia, China, Taiwan, India, Hong Kong. If you visited all those countries, you can sit down. If you got to 15, could you sit down? 1. If you got to 10, can you sit down? Pretty good. If you got to 5, can you sit down? Everyone else can sit down. So I do that to highlight one of the challenges. We've got this Asia century, and we're trying to understand and work closely, particularly as a Westerner. Yet, you know, even with a well-travelled international group here, we haven't been to many of these places. So one of the biggest challenges for ANZ is we've put all these extra local staff on in Asia. We've gone with local staff for the very reason there's no point going into China and putting on 2,000 expatriates. That will give you no advantage whatsoever. So the biggest challenge we've had is how do we connect our 1,200 relationship managers here in Australia in the commercial business that I work with Asia in a practical, meaningful way. So I'm just going to run you through some of the things that we've done, and hopefully you might find them useful in your planning and how you go about things. First of all, you can't beat the travel experience itself. So for the last 2.5 years, we've been, every 6 months, we've been taking 50 of our most senior bankers, putting them on a plane and taking them to somewhere in Asia. We run a 10-day program. They typically start on a Saturday and finish on a Sunday. Start in a country like China, and on the first day, there would be some cultural briefings. We would have a mock business lunch at a Chinese restaurant where the protocol on where you sit and how you toast and where you eat and what you do. And then we build up into the days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we start getting into visiting clients in the region. We do a lot of work with people like Austrade. We usually have some of our experts in the country present. We have functions in the evening with both local staff, quite casual, to connect, make those personal connections. And we build up knowledge. And what we see is from day 1 to day 10, this fundamental shift in our Australian staff's understanding of what is happening in the region. And most importantly, I love, is that you see this sort of excitement and this curiosity build. And when they come back to Australia, straight away they become our best ambassadors in terms of talking about our potential in the region. We've now put 250 staff through this program. We've been to China, we've been to Indonesia, we've been to Hong Kong, Singapore, and our next trip in March we'll be visiting Vietnam and Singapore. It's a fantastic program, but of course we can't get everyone through it. So what we've also done is we've set up what we call our Asia Pacific desks here in Australia and Australia and New Zealand desks across the region. These are typically people who really understand the local market here in Australia and have a good understanding, well connected in the region. The reason we do this is that when we have businesses going through the region, we want to be able to introduce them to the right people in the country. And those people in the country, those Australia and New Zealand desks, can then be the gatekeeper in terms of our customers and our staff in making sure they connect in the country. And vice versa, for investment coming to Australia, we have Asia Pacific desks here in Australia. We've been building these out over the last 18 months, and these desks have teams in them, and it's proving really, really useful in terms of connecting customers and staff across the region. A year ago, we launched this website, anz.com/Asia Pacific, where the public, anyone who wants to, can look at the countries we're involved in. But they can also look at it via industry, which is interesting. We often think about just categorising by countries. You know, what countries are we in? What are we doing? We also talk about here about industries and our industry experience in different countries. And there's the ability to actually connect with one of our bankers in any of the region through this website. When you talk about websites, they're a little bit old hat these days. And what we wanted to do is, because we couldn't take 1,200 people to Asia, we wanted to give our bankers a tool to help them talk about our Asia capability when they're having a coffee with a customer in Brunswick, or whether they're on a regional property in Northern Territory with a cattle farmer. We want to give them a tool. So 1,200 bankers, ANZ bankers, now have iPads with a whole series of tools that help them with their day-to-day jobs. And what we've done just a few months ago is launch what we call our Super Regional Asia or Asia Pacific app. And I thought rather than show a screenshot, I would actually give you a live demo. And I'm always conscious that you should never work with children live, animals, or do live demos, but I'll give it a go anyway. So this is our app, and this is on bankers' iPads. It opens with a map of the region and gives you a nice visual, and you can sort of zoom around the region and see where we are. You can click on any of the countries. You can then get a quick snapshot of the country. And imagine this is a coffee conversation between an Australian customer and a banker talking about our capability in the region. We can give them a bit of an oversight of ANZ, our advantage there. We've got tips for doing business in each country, and these come straight from our country CEOs in each country, an overview of industries, and we've actually got the key people that they will deal with if they were to do business with ANZ in the country. And we also have the ability to refer a client, so our bankers can actually make a referral to any of our Asian countries on the spot live. We've also got the ability to make a presentation. So I'm meeting with a customer who's expressed an interest in Hong Kong, for example. I want to go to that meeting very prepared. I want to have a good understanding. Now, I'm not the luxury of having visited all those countries, and I want to pull together a professional presentation. So what I do is I select the country that I'm going to, that I want to talk about. So we're going to talk about China. I've now got a set of slides that are based on China, and I will take a couple of these core ones. I'll just drag them and drop. I'll talk about Transactive. I might talk about our supply chain capability. And I now have a presentation, so I can have a meaningful conversation with an Australian customer about our network, about us in China, about doing business in China, about some of our core products that we could use to help them with their business, about trading. I can also customise those presentations, those slides. And if a particular customer wanted to know, well, what's happening? What have you done for other customers in the region? I have a series of videos here, which and you can see down the bottom of the page, the countries that are connected. So for each one, there are different countries, different examples. So I can pick one, and I can actually, I haven't got sound on here, but I can actually, with a customer, show them a 2-minute testimonial from a customer about how we've actually helped them across the region. We also use this in terms of insights and articles and research papers that we make available. We make them available on this tool. And again, we're able to email it on the spot to a client. We're able to talk them through it. So that's a tool. It's probably our most popular tool at the moment in connecting people. We've suddenly got a 1,200 workforce who can confidently talk about the region. So that's 4. The 5th one I wanted to talk about is something that we're really excited and we've just launched. It's actually 5 and 6. We've got what we call a business experience program, where we will allow our staff to visit any country in the region for up to 60 days in terms of a secondment. Every 6 months they have to apply. We've got 16 spots that we do every 12 months. And the pure reason for that is simply to get our staff into the region, working in the region. Why 60 days? Well, after 60 days in most countries you run into visa issues. It's a long and expensive process to get a visa. So by making it less than 60 days, it's a business trip, and we're able to get our staff into the region, get a real flavour of what's happening, make real connections, and really see what's happening. And so that's why we pick 60 days. The other program that we're running is what we call our Holiday Plus 2 program. So what we've found is that a lot of our staff travel regularly anyway, for personal reasons. Curiosity Australians are very good travellers. So what we've done is we've created a program where any ANZ staff who's travelling in the region to where one of our offices are, they can opt to work for 2 days in the ANZ office in that country. All their expenses are their personal expenses. They obviously on their leave, they go on holidays, but they can opt while they're there to drop into one of our offices for 2 days. And obviously we don't take their leave away from them. And this is becoming really popular as well as people's sort of curiosity in the region come through. So that's 5 practical examples. I'm going to stop there. Hopefully they're useful examples. It's really, really important for us to connect with the region. The first thing we have to do is connect our people with the region. We have to give them the right tools and resources, and then we can connect our customers into the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Now we've got time for questions and comments and interactions from the floor. And just while you're thinking about what you'd like to ask either or both of our panellists, I thought I'd bounce the ball with one smallish question for both of you. Shamsul has raised the question of the role of the state, and particularly this broader issue of equality, participation in Asia. I was recently in Pakistan, which, as most people know, is about 200 million people. They told me there that only 2.7 million people pay tax. Now, if you're an anti-tax campaigner, you probably think this is a pretty good thing. It's sort of the reverse of the American no taxation without representation, isn't it, in a way, that if nobody's paying tax, is there actually a viable form of participation? And I guess from the bank's point of view, it'd be interesting to know what the level of economic participation is looking like for small account holders, for individuals. Is this becoming a big part of the economic story? But Shamsul, is there a story about states in Asia increasing participation, or is this a question still to be opened up?
Yeah, I think that the idea of participation can be very tricky, because one of the main reform framework that government offers in Asia and other developing countries is they call decentralization. So government decentralizes local governance, the community grassroots organization, so that it's formal government legal institution through which people can participate. They pay tax, they get basic service from the government through local government. But the problem is that often this local government is very effective in UK, Australia, perhaps in America, everywhere, because J.S. Mill said, the political thinker, that without local government, democracy becomes totally dysfunctional. It's very, very critical. Local government is the place where the unit mediates between the government and people to bargain with the central government. But the problem in developing countries is the local government is often very weak. They don't have any revenue. There's a taxation, for example. And many people are not taxable, very poor. They have no income. There is no need for tax. So for this kind of countries, often government uses local government to penetrate into people's life. Often, the more government is detached from people, they're freer. They participate more meaningfully sometimes. In fact, local government often created just to decentralization lead to more centralization. To incorporate those untapped people and bring them together under administration, and often people don't have a right. So as long as these organizations are elected, they are viable organization, there's one way to enhance participation meaningfully with rights and obligations. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
One of the challenges when we talk about the Asia Centre or Asia Pacific, which I'm always talking about, is that there's this massive range of countries with different stages of development and economies. So it's always difficult to make a general comment. One of the roles that banks definitely plays is in terms of financial participation. And if I take 2 Pacific examples, Fiji, which is I'm very familiar with because I lived there for 3 years. We had a financial literacy program which originally was developed with the World Bank and, the UNDP, and it involves literacy and involves basically banking the unbanked. So in Fiji, that was basically taking trucks into the highlands, into the rural areas, financial literacy, and then opening bank accounts. And we banked about 15% more of the population than had been banked over about a 5-year period. That program is being rolled out in PNG at the moment, and it's very, very successful. So that's the way a commercial bank can actually contribute in terms of bringing people into the financial system. What we have to be kind of careful of is where can we be relevant. Obviously, in those countries where we have a very large presence, we can make a very meaningful difference. In some of the countries where we're much smaller, it's more difficult to find a way to increase that participation. But certainly, we're rolling out financial literacy in places like Cambodia and Vietnam very successfully as well.
So if I can add one more.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that another institution is NGO, the non-government organizations. Huge number has been created in different developing countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, big number. But the only problem with NGO is that often they're not very accountable, they're not elected, they're not appointed by the government. The self-created NGO. Often they get donation from different countries, but often some of them are very genuine, very good NGO, very effective, but many thousands of them are often not accountable, not very transparent. So for that, I think local government still is the best option, I think. Yeah, thank you.
All right, now that's got the ball rolling. Who would like to ask a question or make a short comment? Now, we've got a couple of hands up. Are we going with microphones at the back? Happy to take both questions and comments, but if it's going to be a comment, could you try and keep it reasonably brief? And if you'd like to introduce yourself at the front here on the left, Sean.
Guang Hua Wen from Asian Development Bank.
Yep.
Part of the team involved in this Asian 2050 work in the bank, and part of the team actually did the work on inequality in Asia Pacific region, look at within country and between country inequalities and all that. But my question is really, I was actually struck when you mentioned, why do we want to, some people may not want an Asian century. I did not really fully understand. You said, do we really want an Asian century? Well, I mean, as an Asian, as a Chinese, as an Australian citizen, if Australia is part of Asia, I mean, I want an Asian century. And actually, in terms of percentages of GDP or whatever, political power, geopolitical power, economic power, and so on, it's a zero-sum game. But in terms of living standard, it's not a zero-sum game. I mean, Europe is not growing fast. America is trouble. Asia can grow, then why not? I mean, I don't, even for America and Europeans. So that's the first question. The second question related to that is I don't think it's really a matter of whether we want it or not. It's how do we make sure it's going to happen. I mean, at the moment, all these things are projections or even to some imaginations. I mean, can really China grow for the next 20, 30 years? Can India grow for the next 20, 30 years? Yeah, and if China and India cannot really grow, I mean, do we have an Asian century? We don't. So how do we make sure this, and it's more than economics. And actually, I'm more concerned about as an economist, I know more about economics, but really, to me, it's more than economics, and I'm sure people here will know much more. I mean, how do we ensure we have Asian in a non-economic context perspective? Final question, as a Chinese, you mentioned a lot of people go to China to learn public policy. China managed well with economic growth, but in terms of public policy, I mean, China is a very, is a learner, is at very, very early stage. And look at the equality issue, look at the environment, look at the corruption, look at public management. I mean, it's in a big, they're all in a big mess at the moment. So I'd like your insights.
Last point, please. Last point, repeating the last one.
Well, I mean, you said a lot of people go to China, or you call it China model. Now, Chinese government say there's no Chinese model, no China model, right? Okay. But of course, others still can say there's a Chinese model. And you say there are many people, I don't know, 15,000 or 1,500 people going to China to learn how China doing public policy. I was amazed economic management growth, fine, but public policy, I'm not sure.
All right.
Okay. Brief comment.
Okay, I think that, yeah, thank you very much for the comment. I think this is a kind of, we need to be more comprehensive, because when you talk about progress, century, model, it is not just economics, it's not just information. So development means multidimensional thing. It's culture, intellectual achievement. As a kind of whole civilizational discourse is not just economic growth only. So there's a development, progress means something completely different. So as a result, if you read development studies literature, then you find that many of the things the government is doing in Asian countries is okay for this temporary or long-term human benefit, but human-centric. But if you look at ecological, environmental perspective, definitely it could be very, very negative from that point of view. In terms of the distribution issue is another issue. In terms of cultural erosion, definitely culture is eroded. Language is dying in many countries because of under the name of development, culture is eroding, language is dying, many people are disturbed by that. And who is gaining from this whole development agenda in Asia? Not everybody. There are many people in India, for example, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, there are millions of people, they are excluded. They're not really part of this whole development issue. So as a result, I would say, and final thing is, do we want to have good development but dependent on other people, dependency question, or you want to be self-reliant? So there are many questions need to be addressed before we come up with some comprehensive answer to that. Okay, so Asian century is still very much a kind of overarching, abstract thing. It's not real, genuinely, articulated that well. And final thing is about Chinese model. I'm not talking about Chinese model. Chinese model is very there is no classical explanation. It's not Marxian. It is not capitalist. It is a kind of what you call that growth with market with Chinese character or kind of communist principle that we put together. But definitely Chinese in terms of Gini coefficient, in terms of income distribution pattern, in terms of urban-rural gap, for example, definitely is not a good thing. But at the same time, I must say, the Chinese model, Chinese way of development that government pursued for last 10, 20 years, I think that it could be something to look for many poor countries, like Africa, for example, Latin America. There could be some lesson from that, definitely.
Robert, do you want to comment on any or all of that? And maybe if I can tempt you with the end part of the question, which is the Asia century really just the China-India story?
Well, look, I'd start by saying that, the Asia century is real, and it's there. If you look at the average GDP of developing countries in Asia versus the average GDP of developed countries, it's basically double, and it has been for the last 5 to 7 years. So it's a reality, it's there. As an Australian company, we want to participate in that growth. We want to help shape that growth, and we want to learn from that growth. So it's very much connected. I think if you look at, a lot of people sort of forget about the interconnectivity within Asia itself. So for example, if you look at China and you look at Japan, you think of, in Australia you get a lot of sort of, headlines about, kind of political concerns about territory, etc. But when you look and dig deeper, there's enormous investment from Japanese companies into China, which is fueling a lot of the growth there, and vice versa. And the same is with most of the countries. So there's an inter-Asia trade that's happening, which I think will keep the growth rates high. And then you've got this, the rest of the developed countries trade with Asia as well. So the Asia century is not going anywhere. If China slows down, GDP to 7%, our belief that's a good thing, right? That's a sustainable level compared to sort of the 10% levels. So, and wouldn't we love to have 7% GDP growth in Australia?
Indeed. Now, Helen, I think there was somebody down the front here was next.
I have some comments about Asian century. I think it's created by actually Western world, and after the globalization, mainly the driving force was cheap labor. For example, I'm from Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is the largest exporter of ready-made garments industry. But if you look at, in my lifetime, I have seen in last 20 years, the death of many mighty rivers in my country, full of toxic waste, all has become drain, all have become drains. And I have heard of cancer villages in China. Because in Kmart here, when we get a $5 jeans pants, I become sad because this $5 pant actually, for example, it is manufactured in Bangladesh. And I'm actually doubtful about the success of Asian Century because how would you deal with some things? For example, a few days back there was a disaster, industrial disaster in Bangladesh, killing more than 1,000 people. And because of technology, now garments workers, you could just give them a few dollars 5 years back, but now they want a mobile phone. So recently there has been 4 times increase in wage in Bangladesh for garments workers. And many Chinese workers have become not disinterested about working in industries where wage is low. And so another thing Professor Shamsul Haq said that about the NGOs. They have become actually parallel institutions in many countries. And now actually the government and NGOs are at clash. You might have heard that in Bangladesh, the government is planning to make Grameen Bank 19 parts. So there is a rivalry between government institutions and NGOs. So I'm actually also a skeptic about that. Thank you.
I'm going to start with Robert on that one. The other side of the optimistic story of growth is the bank, or I guess in your own travels, are you seeing some of the consequences of that starting to bubble up, or is this not yet on the more commercial agenda, let's say?
Look, I can't talk about Bangladesh. It's not a country I'm familiar with in terms of haven't travelled there and we don't operate there. I don't think you can be sceptical of there being an Asian century. There is an Asian century, there is growth, but I think what you highlight is that with that rapid growth and that change comes risks and comes challenges, and I would agree that is the case.
Actually, there are lots of cost involved in terms of economic growth that many countries are achieving. I think that what has happened is this whole debate about economic growth, high growth, Asian miracle, and in the process, what has been lost is this rational, very objective debate about this adverse side of this growth. The cost of this growth, environmental cost to the human health, for example. There are lots of pollution, for example. In Philippines, some of this river polluted, it will take 25 to 30 years to reverse back. So as a result, the human cost, environmental cost, this cost is not counted. Just growth, we are growing 5%, 10% is good. So there is no thinking back. I think there is a need for that. And then in terms of NGO, I think I agree with you that there's a kind of power sharing between the state and NGO. Often, because of this external connection of NGO with donors, with international agencies, often NGOs are very, very powerful. NGOs are very influential. But at the same time, they're not very accountable. There is no means of accountability. Their audit is not done. They're not elected. They have no public service commission to appoint them. So as a result, they appoint their own people. And in addition to that, in the case of Bangladesh, I know about Indonesia also, the interest rate they charge, the microfinance, for example, is 30% to 40% interest charged to poorest of the poor people. It does not follow any banking logic at all. Like bank charge has 6 to 7% interest. They're charging interest almost like 30, 38 to 40% interest, and poorest of the poor people. And in addition to that, when they get this loan from government and donor, it's almost interest-free. It's very good business. And in a final thing, NGO is supposed to be non-profit, but NGO has become the biggest business in the world. They are in everything, hotel business, garments, IT, telecom, everything. They're supposed to be non-profit. In the name of NGO, they're tax exempt. So it's not fair. It's not level playing field for the business sector. So it's there, because of NGO, there are lots of gain from that. But good NGO are also there. There's good NGO as well.
Well, I can see we're going to have a spirited debate about NGOs as this conference progresses. Yes, over in the middle, if you can reach there to John Hallen, and then I'll take one on the other side after that.
Thanks, Mark. I think this is a very productive discussion that we're having. I wonder if we can go a bit further with it. There is a debate in many developed countries about the relative value of economic growth and what is simplistically called well-being. Well-being, of course, includes economic security, but it recognises that most of us want a wider range of qualities from our life than simply improved income. And I wonder if that debate is going on, Chantrel, in Asia to some extent. I've tried it out and my students ask them, and they tend to say, well, we want economic growth first. But there is also a recognition that they want these wider qualities also. How far has that gone?
I think that actually I wrote a book chapter about 5-6 years ago. The title of the chapter was Myth of GNP and its implication for third world countries. Myth of GNP, lots of growth. Actually, I remember that UNDP published a report on this growth issue. The jobless growth, employmentless growth. Growth actually is often very mystifying. For example, I've given just one small example. Say, a country that does not believe in alcohol, so they have no growth. Now, alcohol production costs millions of dollars, sometimes billions of dollars, alcohol production. Drinking alcohol with dental cost, it's become growth. Drinking alcohol, drunk driving, traffic cost. There are many costs involved, of pathology become GNP. The GNP, that was even often informal economy in China, for example, that was not counted before. You just bring into statistics, it's become growth. You have oil. You bring out the oil, use it, it's become growth. But when it is still reserved underground, it is not growth. So there are many factors you can think about. That lots of growth calculation, is accounting, is very, very misleading sometimes. And growth has tremendous cost. It costs unemployment, it costs human health hazard, sometimes pathology leads to more pathology and we have more and more growth. But in terms of human well-being, often it is anti-human health and anti-human well-being. It's not all growth is good, actually.
Robert, how does the bank look on the well-being issue? You're sending employees there, and obviously we're employing a lot of people now in the region. Is there part of the sort of corporate social responsibility story that actually thinks about that broader well-being issue that John raises?
Well, in terms of our own staff, we've got a consistent set of policies across all the countries. There are common themes in every country. In fact, most of the things are basically the same in every country. There are nuances in terms of policy, depending which country you are. Public holidays, for example, change from country to country. What sort of level of health insurance you provide will change from country to country. Most of our staff are sort of in that, what we call the emerging middle class. So, well-educated, in many instances young, wanting to sort of, professional services moving forward. So, and I talk to a lot of staff, and you talk about what's important to them. And I think, certainly it has shifted a little bit because they've got their job, and they're doing quite well, and so they start talking about things like air quality, leisure. In China, for example, I want to travel. I'd like to be able to just visit Australia without having to go through this long kind of visa process. Whereas when I visit some customers, and we sort of, you visit customers with large factories, for example, the sort of things that are important to the workers there are, can I look after my parents who are now elderly? I'm an only child. Can I look after myself? Can I get a scooter? That's sort of the aspiration is, I actually don't want to ride that bike. I actually want to buy a scooter. If you go to a factory, I visited a factory in Indonesia recently, which I'd visited 6 years earlier, and the manager had shown me the scooter area where the employers park their scooters, and there was like a dozen, and now there's like 1,000. So it's just this incredible change. So it is different from from different people in different areas. Certainly the people that are employed by ANZ are, that sort of emerging middle class, very ambitious. But, with that is coming a different set of values and what they want to do. So it used to be just get ahead, get ahead. But now it's things like, air quality.
That is called corporate responsibility, right? Corporate responsibility, one of the new business ethics.
Yeah. Again, perhaps at the back there on the left, and then we'll come down to the front. Yes, right in the corner, Siobhan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it on?
Yeah, it's on.
Great.
Discussing about the economic growth, our country, Indonesia, our economic growth is growing very, very rapidly. And then the government realized that we have to slow down this growth because we are not ready with any other area of economics. We are not ready with the port infrastructure. We are not ready with the road infrastructures and any other aspect of economics. And in some of our economic growth is growing rapidly, but at the same time, our Indonesian rupiah is getting lower and lower against any other currency. So I can see that there is, what is the relation, but the whole relation, because our economic grows so rapidly, but in a whole that our, at the same time, our economy is also getting lower because it's not giving any significant contribution to our economic as a whole, because our rupiah there's not much value against any other currency. Thank you.
I'm not sure whether the panel is going to comment on the value of currencies. I'll be delighted if they do, but comments generally on the
Well, I think I'm not sure about this currency and growth linkage, but but overall I think that economic growth is something basically is related to commodification of life, basically. Like, for example, a grandmother taking care of a grandchild in traditional India, it is not growth. But a babysitter taking care of a child in somewhere else, it is counted, it is paid, it's part of economic growth. So it's basically what matters most for people is this, whether they contribute to their well-being, their happiness, their good health. And whether growth goes up or down, it is less relevant. I think it's okay, good for the government image, yes, good for business people, but definitely that's not necessarily is always contribute to people's well-being. So that should be the main concern. And growth should be human-centric, environment-centric. It should not be at the expense of ecology. It should not be at the expense of future generation. You deplete resource to the extent that the future generation is in trouble. The growth for current generation, fine, but what happened to future generation? That is all a sustainable development issue. So that's what we have to look at holistically and with human-centered approach. Otherwise, it's becoming what they call, is the term called anthropocentric, or human-centric. I'm selfish. I consume more, I get more satisfaction. It's utilitarian mode of thinking. I think that is not necessarily always compatible with Asian values, actually. We talk about Asian century. Asian values does not discourage this thing. Does not discourage competition, does not encourage too much competition and selfishness in Asian culture. So we have to look at Asian, this is another problem. When we talk about Asian value debate, we don't talk about Asian dress, Asian food, no. Asian value means don't talk, because it's not Asian value. We are not liberal, it's too liberal thinking about, he's talking too much about political. But real Asian value they don't talk about. Same thing, Asian century is not Asian in that sense. It's basically making money, economy grow, is fine. But Asianness, Asia has tremendous, many other things, belief system, norms, religious tradition, historical background, there's so many things involved. And those are marginalized at the expense of economic growth, and those are often eroded in many Asian culture. Yeah.
Can I just tempt you a little bit, and I'll ask Robert the same question. If we go to the specific Indonesia case and link it back to a comment you made in your opening, which is that many parts of this story are about the role of the state and the state's responsibilities for engineering a growth path, for perhaps a distinctive growth path. I think part of the question was what are the dilemmas that a state, if it's going to do this steering role, what are the dilemmas it faces? It can't step out of this arena. It has to make decisions about infrastructure and all of the wherewithal. Do you see a particular challenge for countries like Indonesia in managing that sort of state role?
No, I think that As long as the state is responsible, not all state can do that. Some state is quite highly capable, high capacity, high autonomy from society. They have the power, they have to make sure that they can plan well for the people. But if the state becomes subservient to business interest, state becomes subservient to, say, transnational interest, then it's very difficult for the state to make plan which will go in favor of people. So what is happening in Asia is actually, because of this globalization thing, that the state used to be insular, used to be quite detached from international connection. They take care of people either ruthlessly or democratically, but they connected to people. Now, they have to reconcile between these people's need and international demand. Often, they have to give in to international demand and at the expense of people's needs. So there is a kind of continuous it can vary from country to country. In Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, depends on the country's dependency, international connection. There are lots of case by case basis. It's difficult to generalize. But definitely, today, every state has to reconcile this international demand, international, needs, and with their own local social needs.
I think I was in Jakarta last week, and for those who've travelled to Indonesia regularly, they have a wonderful system of visa on arrival. You can get a visa on arrival at the airport. And I normally use my Visa card to get my visa, pay my $20 US. And I got to the front of a very long queue, and the gentleman said, cash only. And I kind of opened up my $20, cash only US. And I opened up my wallet, and he quickly saw I had no US, but I had Australian. And he said, okay, Australian, $30. Now, I'm a banker, 20 years a banker, but he clearly knew the exchange rate much better than me, and made a very, very healthy margin on that exchange rate exchange. I can't explain the difference in exchange rates or the changes, but look, capital always goes to where it's welcome. To the extent that it's profitable to do something in a country, businesses will look at it. Indonesia, I think, is a great source for manufacturing. It is investing in its infrastructure. It's an amazing contrast when you're there in terms of infrastructure. You can, spend, as I did, 2 hours going from our head office to a client dinner, only 6 kilometres. As an Australian, I'm like, why can't I just get out and walk? But no. Yet I can travel to one of the sort of industrial parks and see one of the most modern factories with fantastic facilities and kind of infrastructure about it. So there's a real contrast there, and there's a real challenge. And all I'd say is that it requires both industry and government to work really closely together to build infrastructure. It's not something that can be done by either.
Well, we'll pause there. This conversation is going to continue in the sessions ahead. Thank you very much to those of you who made an intervention or a question or a comment. We will capture those, and I'm sure that's going to stimulate further debate. And would you please join in thanking Shamsul and Robert for their contributions.